Welcome to Liberty Sound with your host, Ryan Hill.
There's going to be a new world order out there. We've got to lead it.
And I'm going to nominate Donald Trump for Speaker of the United States House of Representatives.
Welcome to the Drive Home with Liberty. This is Liberty Sound, and I'm your host, Ryan Hill, as you just heard. Pursuing broadcast excellence here in this Liberty Sound studio, pursuing as well truth in journalism and a whole lot more. I'm glad you have joined me today for this show. If you're listening live, we're on Podbean today, and the show will also be featured on Podbean as a podcast, syndicated to Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, and other audio podcast services. Then later on tonight, we'll of course be on Rumble and YouTube. And I have a lot of exciting content that I have at least planned at this point for those channels. Some unique video content. Things are in development, but I'm in the process of getting that all set up. Maybe we'll talk about that as time allows today. You can see the notes for the show in the notes for the show on whichever platform you're on. It should be all in there. And you can follow me if you'd like to hear more and see more of what I've got going on in different places on the internet. You can find me on Gab, on Truth Social. I've even dusted off my Twitter account recently, although it needs more dusting. A lot of dusting at home too. And I'm on Telegram, and I have different content that I put on each of these different channels because they all work a little bit differently. And I've got a slightly different audience on the other ones. So coming up today, we're going to talk about the governor's debate here in Oklahoma. There's also a Pennsylvania Senate debate. As you know, we've been tracking the Oz-Fetterman race going on there. And really, I wish we had more time to talk about Doug Mastriano, but perhaps another day, maybe next week. Then other Oklahoma races that are going on. And if time allows, and I think it will at the end, I've got to play that MSNBC panel of Trump supporters that totally backfired on them because it's just hilarious. And I can't wait to get to that. So we'll make time for it. Like I said in a couple of previous weeks too, I don't mind going a little bit over the hour segment on this format anymore because A, I've gotten used to it a little bit, and B, because it actually doesn't matter so much because this is not radio and I'm doing it live because that's the only way we know how to do it, because that's the best way to do a show like this. There's less editing. I don't have to go back. Now I don't have a cough button and a cancel button to dump if I say something that I don't like, but hey, at least I don't have to go back and edit, other than I mess with the intro and the outro a little bit as necessary. So that is sort of what I was going to start things off today too. So I might as well go into that. I was asked by somebody, I guess this week or recently, and from time to time, talking about employment and different things in life. And it's always, well, what is it that you really want to do? And I think that means, even if the person asking it doesn't mean this, but what that means to me at least is, what is it that you want to do over and over and over again? Because that's what really most professions involve, unless you talk very high level executive type things, even though some of those can be repetitive, but you have to be more of an entrepreneur at that level because you're really creating the whole world. But the majority of us out there work jobs, at least through most of our life, where you're the underling, okay? And you report to somebody who tells you what to do or supervises you to make sure that you're doing whatever it was that you were hired to do. And in a lot of cases, these jobs become very repetitive. You have a limited set of things that you do, maybe an expertise in one area or another, but you're doing it over and over again, whether it's an assembly line or not. They kind of turn our jobs into assembly lines because, well, I mean, it's easier to manage that way. It's easier to say, hey, I need 5 people that can fill out spreadsheets and transfer data from one system to another because we have this process that needs that to support it. That's easier than reinventing the process all the time. So I think there's a place for both. But anyways, getting back to the question, what is it that I want to be doing? And I struggle a lot with that question. I'm being transparent here right at the beginning of the show because there isn't a single one thing that I want to do over and over again for the rest of my life. I would go crazy. Okay. I'm going to have to at least make some career changes, as I have done in my early parts of my working career. Maybe I'm not quite halfway through that at this point. But the true answer, I think, at least, is what do I want to be doing is this. Okay. I like being on the air, not just because, I actually listen to the sound of my own voice less often than you might think. It's kind of difficult to find the time when you're doing all the other parts of this. But I'm talking about streaming, producing content, whether that's written content, audio, or coming soon, video content. It's something that I can actually do over and over and over again, regardless of whether I'm even being paid for it. Because let me tell you, brothers and sisters, at this point, that's not what this is about. I joked, I think, a week or two ago that I was finally getting paid by Google, or if I didn't say that, there may be some outstanding dues in the works, but we're talking like $10, and it's from 10 years ago on some random one-off video I made. It had nothing to do with this channel or exactly all the stuff that I'm doing now. But hey, I'll take it if they will send it to me. But it would be nice, if that was all, happening at this point. But that's not why I do it. I do this because I feel that there is a need in the area of information getting out there and being able to process politically oriented news stories or world impacting events, but without the lenses that you can't even see through, of partisan lenses that are out there on most of the major networks. You're getting either one view that both sides share but say it a little bit differently. We've got some of that content coming up in one of the debates in Oklahoma. Or you just get pushed into these false twin opinions, and you've got to choose opinion A or opinion B, and there's no room for opinion C. Remember a couple of years ago, the Libertarian Party was starting to make some noise, and in some places got more and more support. But really, the media environment in this country just doesn't support that alternative view. So I would like to fill in some of that gap if I can. I'm doing what I can here and kind of learning in the process, because that's part of doing it live. I didn't go to school to learn how to do audio engineering or how to host this and that, but maybe some things that I've done in past stages of my life have still prepared me for this. So I continue to go on doing it. I also have a couple of ways that I'm looking at, turning this into a support-based model, or a way that I can get my costs covered for using all these services. It does cost to host podcasts like this. Not much, but it would be nice to, hey, let's make goal number one to cover that. As a matter of fact, this is not directly related to it, but the show is getting close to having a 100 score for engagement, which just means like it's just a counter. It's not like 100%, but on likes and loves of the show, or the little hearts that it gives. So just a few more. If you're listening to this show, I'd appreciate a couple of those engagement points, almost getting to 100. So that'll be fun. I like to watch those milestones. It's nice to know that at least the message is getting out somewhat and somewhere. So I will mention just briefly, I don't want to run too long on talking about myself and all the things I'm doing. I want to get to the topics of the day and the topics of this week. But one way that you can support, if you like the work that I do and you just, feel like it's worth your time and money, one way you can support that is I have an ebook that I just published a few weeks ago on my website. It's on standardexcellence.net. And it is it's an actual product. It is a 16-page ebook that I wrote at a younger point in my life, maybe 10 or 11 years ago, I think I said. And it's called A Brief Journey from Fear to Perfect Peace. It's about a time when I was really struggling with direction in life, and specifically with, like, I thought I was doing what God wanted me to do with my life, yet things weren't working out. I was a little bit disillusioned, and the experience taught me a lot of things just about life in general, but also about how to refocus your trust on God in times like that. So check it out, standardexcellence.net. The title is called Our Confidence in Him. And if it's not on the front page, I should probably put it on there, but it is in the store section. So just look for that. Then also, if that starts, I am starting to get that message out to people, and I start to see that it is reaching people, I would actually like to rewrite it or revise it and make it a little bit longer and talk about the continuing lessons after that point in my life. Did it work out? Did I get, like it's about confidence. Did I get confidence? Well, that's still in some ways something that I need more confidence, but in a lot of ways I actually have confidence in these areas where I was really struggling, to where I don't fret so much about life in the way that I used to. Now I've got new things to fret about, of course, that's part of life. We all have that, an ongoing thing, but that's what I want to write about, is like, okay, I've moved on from here, but here are some places that I could still seek God's guidance, and then maybe I can even have some more biblical references to throw in there. But it's a good book. I don't want to oversell it, but check it out. And also, hey, I'm shooting for 10 subscriptions on Rumble. So if you want to check out the Liberty Sound Rumble channel, it's over there, and I think it's at like 8. So it'd be cool to watch that go into double digits. And the more places that I'm out there, the less likely being potentially canceled or anything happens to one. Even the networks become more or less popular over time. They change their models and all that stuff. So want to be spread out a little bit, but I'm keeping it just in the stated platforms for now. Okay, so let us jump into some headlines. And before we get to headlines proper, I'm just going to make a note, another aside here, that the midterms are now 2 weeks away. And if you're listening to this tonight or over the next day or so, it's less than 2 weeks away. So just checking in. Is everybody ready to vote? Have you made your plans? Maybe you've already voted early. Maybe you voted by mail. I don't recommend doing those forms at this time. I think that there should really be, the laws I would prefer only had rare exceptions for who can do that and when, but that's not the way it is right now. So a lot of people take advantage of that avenue, but I would still recommend voting on election day. In fact, if you have received a mail-in ballot in the mail, I think that this is proper procedure in basically every state, that you don't necessarily have to vote with that ballot, but you better hold on to it. And then I would recommend check procedures in your state, but at least in my state, I believe you can take that to the precinct on the day of and vote, and tell the precinct workers that this was sent to me, but I actually want to vote in person. And they'll either have you destroy that ballot or vote with it, but not with, you don't get 2 ballots. Okay. Don't be doing that. That's bad. All right. That's what we're trying to get rid of. So midterms, 2 weeks away. What are the issues? Not abortion. Go back and listen to last week's show. I talked about what I think the biggest threats are to liberty. And I believe I also talked about just the fact that the midterms, what you thought they were going to be 3 months ago, is not necessarily where we are today. Is abortion an issue? Maybe 5%, but way beyond that is international tensions, the food supply, inflation crunch, and all this other stuff, the volatility of the stock market, which has kind of come back up a little bit from its most recent lows. But, is that the direction it's going to continue to go? Well, perhaps a little bit as we go into the holiday season. And then I think sometimes you see a sell-off kind of in December at the end of the year as everybody starts to get ready for the next one. So we'll keep our eyes on all of that. And if anything significant comes up, then I will be sure to mention it. So also on the midterms, I think militarily speaking, this is going to sound so weird, as a strategy, Democrats are playing a game in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. They're playing a game of keeping Russia preoccupied with what would have otherwise been clearly Russian territory right now. It's still considered disputed, although I don't know if the people in those territories think it's disputed. They may have already made up their minds on which country they should belong to. But nonetheless, internationally, it's all disputed. I think that's actually working as a strategy, at least politically. Here's what I mean. There's been some saber rattling of nuclear talk, okay, but it's not actually really gotten to the point that we're like, oh boy, they're gonna launch it. I mean, yes, the news channels have tried to float that idea to keep people watching the news channels, but we're not quite there. And I think part of the reason is because every time a package of aid is sent over to buy weapons, to buy defenses, or whatever. It staves off the ultimate end of this conflict, which I think is going to go mostly in Russia's favor. I'm not making an outright prediction, but it does seem like that's, it's headed towards Russia's going to keep most, if not all, of this territory that's been in dispute. They may have some sanctions left on what's left of Ukraine may get a NATO seat, maybe. I don't know. Again, not a prediction. Hasn't happened yet, but they sure have been pushing for it. So I think that in terms of getting ahead of the midterms, this all helps the Democrats tremendously. So thank you to our wonderful Republicans who have voted along with these aid packages to just enable it all to go ahead. You're actually helping the Democrats. And with the suspicions we have about some Republicans, I think that makes sense. It's like they like to play. A lot of Republicans for years and years and years have preferred to be this minority party that is kind of a bulwark against taking things too far. And that is perhaps the worst description that could be had of conservatism, which is that you're not really conserving anything, you're just preventing things from going farther and faster than they are. So speaking of conservatives, over across the sea into Great Britain, Liz Truss has resigned as prime minister, and that was after only 45 days being in office. It's the shortest term of any PM. Maybe it's modern history. I don't know if that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, but 45 days, that's a pretty short stint as PM. And, I'm just going to say it. I've already truthed it or tweeted it or something, but Boris Johnson doesn't look so bad now, does he? Okay. Everybody was ready to throw him out. Oh, too much controversy, too many girlfriends, too many, whatever. I don't even know. I mean, I know there's plenty of things that could be said about just about anybody in the public eye. He was certainly a person who didn't hide maybe his life outside of politics, which is kind of interesting. There's a lot of Trump parallels with Boris Johnson, and I don't necessarily agree with all the things that he did, but I think that he actually projected some strength and was doing somewhat of a good thing for England. But we will see what goes on now. Who's the new PM? I should have wrote down the name. So it's somebody has already been selected as their new PM because it stays within the same political party's control or something like that. So bringing it back home now. Next headline up is another topic that I will continue to cover on this show as long as we're doing it. And that is a tragic topic of these shooting incidents, not just any and every shooting, but school shootings, mass casualty, targeted assassinations. I see kind of a theme and a trend of that happening in the news. And here we are yet again. Won't spend a lot of time on it, but the shooter kills 2 and injured 6 others. This occurred in, I was going to say it's St. Louis. Okay. Unfortunately, I was having to look through too many stories of multiple casualty shootings recently, but 2 killed, 6 injured in a shooting at St. Louis High School, and the gunman is dead. So I don't know if that's a third additional killed or if that's among the 2. The story from MSN via, I think, some local news. An armed former student that's significant there too, broke into a St. Louis high school Monday morning and warned, "You are all going to die," before fatally shooting a teacher and a teenage girl, wounding 7 others now, before the police killed him in exchange of gunfire. So the numbers are a little bit jumbled on that. So basically 3 dead, 7 additional injured is what it looks like. And it occurred just after 9 a.m. on, was it yesterday actually? It was yesterday or the day before. I guess it would have been Monday, right? So being Tuesday now. And police held a conference on that afternoon and identified the the shooter as a 19-year-old who graduated from that school last year. The motive is still under investigation, but they suspect there may have been some mental illness that he's experiencing, or should say was experiencing, since his life is also now extinguished. And it's tragic. I'm not just covering this because, let me find shooting stories and cover those. But I do think mental illness is a serious part of this. Although mental illness has probably skyrocketed since the COVID shutdowns and the ease back into where we are now, where just about everybody is back in regular school. But that hurt people's mental health. Yet we haven't seen a, an enormous uptick over what we've already had in shootings like this. It's just been about the same, I guess. It's not getting any better. Um, but there's some more education stuff to come up here in a minute, and I'll just cover that again when we get to it. But I do think that mental health is got to be a concern. However, we also can't just section this off to, well, okay, well, let's hire some mental health workers because mental health is too low. Well, we have to really look at the underlying causes, because it's not lack of counseling. I'm not against counseling. I think you need to have them there to help intervene. But why is this happening in the first place? How are people getting so depleted and so down on life at that young of an age that they're willing to do these heinous events? And there's different reasons. I know could spend a whole series and do a whole, set of interviews and shows just on that topic alone. But we'll instead move on and come back to these topics as they come up. All right, moving back over across the Atlantic Ocean again, disorienting scene out of Shetland, Scotland. And this one involves a damaged undersea cable communications line that would cut off Shetland, which is an island north of Scotland, but part of Scotland, and it's north of the main British Isle. That this cable was cut, and it caused all kinds of electronic havoc for a period of time. This from BBC News. Communications to Shetland have been severely disrupted after a subsea cable was damaged. Police have declared a major incident after the south subsea cable between the islands and the mainland was cut. The force said some landlines and mobiles were not usable, or cell phones were not usable, and that officers were patrolling to try to reassure residents. Repairs to another cable connecting Shetland and Faroe are ongoing after it was damaged last week. So you've got two cables connected to the same island, both directions, one going to another island, that have been cut in a span of a week, or maybe it's 2 weeks. That's a bit odd, wouldn't you say? One cable being cut. Now, this is after the pipeline rupture too, which was determined to be sabotage. They don't know that in this case. Let's see. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said it was an emergency situation for the island. Scottish Government's Resilience Committee had met and was working with partner agencies to ensure support was provided. And she, the minister, Sturgeon, said the assumption was the damage was accidental, adding, "There's nothing to suggest otherwise, but work is continuing to assess exactly what the cause of the problem has been." The article goes on for longer, and I will leave a link to you because it talks about how these undersea cables work and gives you kind of an idea of what exactly is happening when this gets cut. But here's one of the important bits that occurred when this happened. ATMs went out of service, and so did cellular service. Businesses were not even able to take credit card payments. So if you didn't already have some physical form of money, whatever, cash bills they use there, euros, pounds, something like that. I know a lot, don't I? Know so much about the world and how it all works. But I do know this: they couldn't access their ATMs. And if you didn't already have cash, you weren't able to buy things because the credit systems were down. So this will have an impact if you happen to be on an island. I suppose it's only connected with undersea cables, but it's just interesting, when you think about these things, and someone might be thinking even now, well, how could mobile go out because if a cable was cut? It's wireless, right? Well, it's wireless to your phone. It's wireless to the device that you're connected to, and a lot of credit card payment processing systems run off of cell phones now. Small businesses, they use these attachments to your phone where you can swipe or insert a card and pay for a transaction right there. But if your mobile service suddenly loses its connection, you see on the back end of all of these technologies, all these wireless technologies, it's still connected with wires. that's what all this fiber digging is for. It's so they can support all of these towers and all of the buildings. And once upon a time, we all would like to run these wires to our houses. Now you can even get 5G internet or satellite internet or rural broadband services that run wireless to your house. Yet there will still be a wired connection that then gets that to like a router in your own home to give your other devices connections. I suppose with 5G, you may be able to eliminate that device now. I don't know, but they are all connected with wires. So what happens when you cut the wires? Well, that's what happens. I could go into another story about just internet outages in general and how the internet could be shut down, but we'll go ahead and skip that one. It's not terribly interesting. Let's give you something more interesting to everybody here at home. Did you know? And we're going to stick to the Oklahoma uh, side of things for a while here now, so buckle up. Did you know that recreational marijuana is going to be a state question next year? That's right. It's going to appear on a ballot in March. It was a ballot initiative. I was loosely aware of the fact this petition was circulating earlier this year, but honestly, I didn't know the status of it. I don't know who was behind it this time. There was some big legal group that was going through different states when we had a similar petition passed for medical marijuana. And the news has reported that this is to cost the taxpayers, or maybe it's coming from the government, to cost taxpayers $13 million for this election. So I just have a couple of comments, and then I'm going to move on to the next Oklahoma story. One is, maybe we shouldn't have so many random election days throughout the year, and we should keep them confined to November and maybe one special election. And then people would know when election day is, and they would know when to look up what's covered on that election instead of it being attached to some municipal or school board one off. Not necessarily even every place has a race, except for this one question that nobody's thinking about. I think that's how a lot of some of these things get passed in some cases. In other cases, I think when the medical marijuana state question came through, a lot of people turned out to vote, and it was on, I don't remember what other election it was, but that was some of the longest lines I've seen in Oklahoma at a non-presidential election. The other comment that I have on it is I'm just frustrated with the legislature in Oklahoma because this has been an issue. Whatever your opinion is, if we should do this or we should not do this, shouldn't have any marijuana, we should hang people for transporting. I mean, I don't know. I'm getting extreme. I don't know anybody who really thinks that. But our legislature has ignored citizen requests to make legislation about this issue. And as a result, we've had state questions that have been successful because enough people actually want to see this change in Oklahoma. And the Republicans who have been in control of this legislature are basically the whole time that this has been an issue, although some Democrats have led in terms of making it an issue and getting some hearings held. But Republicans just won't deal with it. They won't make any legislation. And so we end up getting these initiatives that now go into the state constitution, and it limits what the legislature can do thereafter to do anything about it. So it's just like what happened with the Medicaid expansion. That eventually went to a ballot initiative. And despite the fact that our governor even had Stitt at the time had an alternative plan to expanding Medicaid, he was not able to implement that at all because the state question passed and now dictates how things must be done. I don't think that's how our government's supposed to work. I'm not saying whether or not this state question should pass. I haven't even had time to look at the language. I imagine it's filled with all kinds of objectionable things to, even if you think that this is something we should deregulate or legalize marijuana. I'm sure there's going to be problems with the way that this question and the resulting law will be worded. And then we have to wait for another ballot initiative. That's not going to happen. We're going to move on to some other issue. So we'll come back to that probably next year sometime as we get closer to it and see what happens there. Next up, Oklahoma City has been having what I'm going to go ahead and call a crime surge And there's two stories that I want to bring to you that have ultimately resulted in the death of children in their own home, or at least one child in their own home. First up is a KFOR news story. They're both from KFOR, at least these accounts of them. Authorities are asking for the public's help as they search for clues in an unsolved murder. On March the 6th, Oklahoma City police were called to a reported shooting near Rockwell Avenue and Wilshire Boulevard. Investigators say the another 19-year-old Malachi Titus, and a friend left an event, and they were followed. At some point, their vehicle was hit by several rounds of bullets. And then hear from the Oklahoma City police detective that was looking into this. So he said that when they left the parking lot, they were followed by a vehicle. The vehicle followed behind the victim's vehicle until it stopped at a red light at the location. And the suspect drove along the driver's side and shot over 30 times at the victim's vehicle, and apparently didn't hit the passenger because there were two people in that car. And Titus, who was the driver, was killed in the shooting. So I don't know who. At first I thought the 19-year-old was the shooter, but it looks like they are still searching for the criminal that did this. But I have questions about this. Looks to be targeted. Okay, 30 shots into one person. There was some reason behind that, right? What's going on there? And the other story is this, which is a more recent occurrence. An Oklahoma City family is still without answers as they prepare to bury their 9-year-old child. It's been tragic, like it's been hard, said Marquitha Barber. We have no leads. We don't have nothing. All we've got is each other. Around 9 p.m. on Tuesday, October the 4th, emergency crews were called to a reported drive-by shooting near Southeast 47th and East Avenue. Barber told KFOR that Fuller was playing his PS4 inside his father's home when he was hit by a stray bullet. A bullet came through the window, struck him, and sadly killed him. 2 other people were at home, and thankfully nobody else was hit, said Master Sergeant Gary Knight with the Oklahoma City Police Department. Police are without leads in this case, too, as to who pulled the trigger. However, they believe it was intentional. Yeah, no kidding. And what I think what they're saying is they don't necessarily believe that the kid was targeted, but the shooting at the house was intentional. And there's more stories that we could go on like this. I've just been noticing and hearing a lot of it lately. It has me concerned. I am an Oklahoma City resident myself, and I don't like seeing the dissolution of our peaceful city. We have even seen, although not very much, but there was some vandalism during the 2020 Summer of Love. Tulsa was the one that really saw more vitriol that occurred there. But even Oklahoma City had some instances of some broken windows in a protest and some spray paint, which is, spray paint's one thing, but that's not, you don't want to see that everywhere either, but it's like anarchy symbols and all that stuff that were associated with that time. We then had our mayor take the knee with a crowd of Black Lives Matter protesters, which was symbolic at the time of basically it was saying, we're so sorry, those of us who are, especially those of us, white ones, who are in charge and have been in charge, and we are humbly asking for your apologies. You were absolved of everything that you've done, including all the vandalism, because it's justified. That's what taking the knee to that meant. And that was not a good message for the city. I don't think it's helped us. I don't think it would have hurt to not do that either. So it's just not a good situation that we're in. And seeing the way that crime is becoming somewhat rampant around here. I mean, we're not a Chicago or anything, but something's got to be done that's more than lip service to saying, well, we've got to fund the police and don't defund the police. I mentioned last week that I think in some cases we're asking the police to intervene in situations that really that's not what a police force should be for. They should be investigating crimes. They should be looking at priorities, not necessarily breaking up domestic disputes. Although if those become criminal situations, of course we want our police to respond. But there's all this talk about sending, mental health workers to a situation that could result in that mental health worker getting shot. And that's not going to help anything either. I think we have to look at beyond the surface in all of these issues is really what I think I'm saying over and over again. Otherwise, we just let this happen and we say, oh well, we're going to try to get to the bottom of it. And then next thing you know, somebody's 9-year-old who had nothing to do with whatever situation's going on with the adults, or these kids coming out of a party, they're, legally over the age of 18, but still very young. And this is not the city that I think none of us that live in cities like this want to see this happening. Same thing with homelessness. It seems to be getting out of control around here. And interestingly enough, the mayor that I mentioned easily skated back into a re-election this year in yet another election that has us scratching our heads as to how did this turn out with the direction things are going. Yet this person increases their turnout and coasts right back into a re-election. It's why we have questions about our elections in all 50 states, actually, because of this seems to be this seems to be a theme. I'm probably describing what could be your hometown as well. And I sure hope it's not, but we know all too often that is the case. Next up, I want to show you, or I guess I can't show you because we're not doing video yet, but I will play for you a couple of samples from Dr. Pam Popper, who this clip was on Dr. Drew. It was clipped by Chief Nerd and clipped further by me. She is the founder, Pam Popper is, of Wellness Forum Health, which is an educational resource for health resource on diet and lifestyle. And I actually knew who she was from, I had seen her on The Real Truth About Health, which is another organization that's, focused on nutrition and lifestyle for health, for being healthy in general, as opposed to taking a drug for everything. Although they have doctors from every branch of medicine that they get to come on and just kind of cut through the myth, cut through what you may hear on some news report and the popular science aspects of it, and really give you some good information about nutrition. Well, Dr. Pam Popper was on this show, and she, on behalf of, I'm assuming, Wellness Forum Health, is filing a lawsuit against EcoHealth, which it's a tort claim, and basically saying that they originated COVID, I think is what they're saying. So listen to this and we'll break it down.
So if DuPont puts chemicals in the drinking water and people get sick, then you can sue them. All the people who got sick or cancer, whatever, can sue DuPont. So the first thing is that it's very difficult to throw this case out because it's not unique. This type of case is filed every day in the United States, okay? So we filed against EcoHealth, Peter Daszak, his wife, Janet Cottingham Daszak, Ian Lipkin, who is part of the cover-up at Columbia University, and Ralph Barrick, who is at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
So it's a toxic tort claim, which she likens to if DuPont or some chemical manufacturer had some chemical that leaked into the water supply and started causing disease and death. And I think I heard about a class action suit or some settlement that's out even just this week that is similar to that situation. Just like you could sue the company that made and distributed the chemical that didn't adhere to the safety, she's saying that these people should be sued as well. And there's information that was given to her. The claim is against EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak and his wife, who are apparently part of that organization, as well as 2 university staff or researcher or something. I'm not sure exactly what their position is, but Ian Lipkin at University of Columbia or Columbia University and Ralph Barrick at UNC Chapel Hill. She also said during this interview that it's a 1 in 100 million chance that COVID-19 was not lab-borne. And that's much more believable to me now than it was originally. But even with just in the last week, I think we talked about this too. There's been a US university that has been enhancing COVID strains in some way to make them more lethal. So you want to tell me that that's not how it originated? I think I would buy that at this point, that it was of lab origin or whatever. Okay, so she also says that she expects to name additional plaintiffs and defendants.
We filed against them a toxic tort claiming that they unleashed this thing on humanity. And as a result, there are 6.5 million people, they say, who died of this virus, hundreds of thousands permanently injured, and et cetera. So that's the basis for the lawsuit. We filed it in federal court a couple of weeks ago. Of course, usually what happens next is the motion to dismiss. Interestingly enough, they instead filed for a 50-day extension on Friday to respond. I consider that a pretty good sign on our side of the issue, because usually they just can't wait to get into court and try to dismiss it. We're optimistic about this, and we also filed as some of the defendants were John and Jane Doe, because we think that there are many other people who've been part of this whole conspiracy and cover up and everything else, and we believe that we'll end up naming them as additional defendants, and that there will be many more plaintiffs as well.
Okay, that's the end of that chopped up clip. Sorry for if it, broke continuity for a second there. I don't know if it was totally clear on your end, but it sounded like there was some choppiness on mine. But that's how we go when we're live on Liberty Sound. Hey, if you're still with me, I really appreciate you listening to the show. It means a lot to me. I hope this show continues to reach more and more people. So, before we get into the Oklahoma political debate section, we're going to talk about the governor's race. We're also going to talk about one of the Senate races today. This is on politics. Nothing turns people off to politics quite like politics or political meetings and politicians. I just have to say, because I've gone to a lot of them this year, that it's difficult, I think, to stay in the fight a lot of times, because the more you get into the minutia of it, you just start to see that not everybody's motives are 100% pure. I mean, everybody's got different motivations for why they do what they do, but we always want to think that, oh, okay, these people that look like they are on our side, or they are one of the people. And I'm not talking about anybody in particular. I've got nobody in mind particularly when I say this, but a lot of times, even those people that seem to be the most loyal have higher loyalties or other loyalties that you just may not know about. And sometimes that turns into situations where you see someone that you thought had the same views as you did on everything go off a different direction. And it can be very disheartening. Um, I think that's part of what's wrong with the party system in politics. That's another long topic that we could talk about. In fact, it'd be good to have some interviews on that topic about what if we didn't have political parties, what would we do? Or what's the alternative? Can we remake the parties as they exist? Is there something that can change with them? Personally, I don't think that you need them in the age of Spotify and iTunes and Podbean. I didn't have to get an agent to start a show. Now, maybe there's some advantages to doing it that way, and that's what people that, maybe have other things already going on, they can tap into those resources. That's fine, but you don't need that. An artist can get started on Spotify or Apple Music with their own recordings. They can record in their own home studio. I've got a makeshift studio going on here, not quite set up for music and all that, but it's not a whole lot more than what I've already got here. So it's not that expensive necessarily to do, although you can spend a lot of money, but that's just like a political campaign. Why do you need, in fact, a lot of times the party doesn't even help you until the very end, yet we're so locked into, well, I've got to have the Republicans, or if Democrats think I have got to have the Democrats, and end up voting for people you would otherwise never even consider to vote for. I don't care if you're on the left or the right. We all have to stomach some candidates sometimes in order to reach what we think is the greater good. But is it really working out for good? Well, I'll let you be the judge. So let us get to our first race that we're talking about here. This is Madison Horn on Flashpoint. We all know about Kendra Horn, who is also running in the Senate, and she's the milquetoast Democrat who ousted Steve Russell in the U.S. House before getting ousted herself by Stephanie Bice in 2020. So this is not that Horn. This is Madison Horn, who is running against James Backtrack Lankford. So that's the race. At least I'm pretty sure I've got that right. I think in the Inhofe special retirement election, you've got Markwayne Mullen versus Kendra Horn. And if I got that backwards, both races are against a Horn. So that's at least helpful to me. So let's listen to a little bit of her interview on Flashpoint. And I just thought this was something that you would all want to be aware of, especially if you're in Oklahoma or if you know anybody in Oklahoma who's trying to figure out how they're going to vote because, they're maybe tired of the way things have been in politics and maybe they think that changing from Republicans would be a good change for us. Well, let's have a listen to this first.
Welcome back to Flashpoint. We have U.S. Senate candidate Madison Horn joining us today, and we're so glad to have you here. You've got something here. You've got the Curbside Chronicle.
Curbside Chronicle.
They do fantastic work for the Homeless Alliance here in town.
Well put. And there's a bio in here about you and James Lankford. And
you made notes.
I did make notes. You talked about, this is a very serious issue, but I did make notes. You talk about bodily autonomy, that you're going to fight for bodily autonomy. Take that and tell me what you mean exactly.
Sure. So I think that we know what I mean, and that's just...
Yeah, we do.
Right?
Oh, do we? We know what you mean? What does she mean? Bodily autonomy. Well, let's let her continue and explain.
And so what that means is really for a woman to be able to rule and dictate her own body is what that means.
Oh, that's what that means. A woman can rule and dictate her own body. Well, the word didn't come up in there, and the hosts of Flashpoint, which is supposed to be, the hold your feet to the fire kind of show, they just say, oh, yeah, we know what you mean. Yeah. Let's move on. Let's continue to the next topic, right? Well, what she means is abortion, okay? Plain and simple. That's what she's talking about. That's what we discussed at the beginning of the show about it not actually being that big of an issue, yet they open, of course, with it because it's still been, at least in the political circles, an issue. So I'll let this go on just a little bit, and then we will discuss the next race.
And the reason why that is so important right now, and so many people across the nation and across Oklahoma will be coming out to vote on this issue, is because right now we are seeing extreme government overreach on this topic. And Oklahomans, well, there's a lot of conversation. Well, do Oklahomans feel this way? Yes. Less than a third support the strict abortion laws that are in place right now.
I can tell you as somebody who lives in Oklahoma, which is a very conservative state, despite all the questions that I have and so many of us have about, what exactly is the political makeup of a state where we're not totally sure if we trust our voting system because we base our assumptions off of the outcomes of polls and elections. I've heard maybe one person, and it's not even somebody who's a friend. It's somebody that was, at a checkout counter talking about this issue. The only place I'm hearing about it is on the political shows. It's not even really a topic that comes up so much at like the conservative meetings and gatherings. It's been mentioned, but it's usually like, oh yeah, okay, well now this has happened. It's not like, all right, let's go on a crusade now and, find all of the women who are considering abortions. We actually tend to leave that. I even heard a commercial today. We tend to leave that to private entities. That's what the Democrats actually fight against, is having these crisis pregnancy centers where, and this is the commercial that I heard today, was for one of those that allows young expectant mothers to hear the heartbeat of their, unborn child. That changes the way that they look at this issue. It's not just about bodily autonomy and ruling your body. there is another body that's inside there. Once you hear or see an image of that, it's impactful. It changes you. It becomes real in a way that it couldn't have been before. So that's what she means. That's what this Democrat running for the Senate against, I do call him James Backtrack Lankford because he's backtracked on a few things, but I don't see him backtracking on this issue. So that's just something to keep in mind as you get ready to vote. And in any state, when you boil it down, it may not matter so much. In fact, as Horn went on, she gives almost the same answers that you would have expected from Lankford on the war with Ukraine, on the energy crisis. She disagrees with the Biden administration releasing oil from our strategic reserve. She says that's a bad idea and wouldn't do that. Well, guess what? Democrat or Republican, if you're running for U.S. office in this state, you're not going to get away with being anti-energy, at least not in your rhetoric. But what she will be, if she were to be elected, is going to be a vote for the Democrat policy agenda. It's going to be one more vote away from getting things done that people on the right say that we want done. So it does matter, even if it doesn't matter. It's kind of, I don't know. That's not an endorsement of anybody, actually. I was going to say it's a tepid endorsement, but it's not an endorsement. Not making any endorsements there. I reserve the right to endorse when I feel like it. How about that? How does that sound? Next up, I've got some clips here from the Kevin Stitt and Joy Hofmeister debate, which was carried by C-SPAN last Wednesday and was put on by local news channels. I'm assuming more than one, but the full video is available on news9.com. I'll put the link to that one in the notes on this show too, because I think this is one where I'm scratching my head about, I don't know what's going to happen in the elections in 2 weeks. And I usually have a pretty strong indication by this point of how I think things are going to go. And I mean, nationally, the race is tight in Pennsylvania to where between the early votes and the election day votes, and then, the late votes that they're not supposed to count. I don't know what's going to happen in the governor's race or the Senate race in Pennsylvania. I also don't really know. I mean, I think Governor Stitt is going to be fairly easily reelected, but I just don't know. I haven't actually seen signs for him out in people's yards. I've seen signs for Hofmeister, and Hofmeister is the Democrat who was formerly a Republican, who quipped during their debate that she was actually a Republican longer than Stitt's been registered to vote. And I don't know the veracity of that claim one way or the other either. Perhaps he was registered and a long time ago and then didn't vote and fell off the records. I don't know, but I don't think it really matters. It's kind of funny during the debate, though. But listen to this early on part of the debate, and I'm finishing it, or it's finishing one of Hofmeister's answers or her introduction, and then we get into the first question. But listen to the moderator and listen to the way that he addresses Stitt, and then we'll compare that later to how he addresses Hofmeister.
Actually traveling many miles all over the state talking with Oklahomans. I've got 500,000 miles on my car to prove it too.
Wonderful. Governor, I've got the first question for you. You campaigned for office in 2018 on making Oklahoma a top 10 state. I think everybody's heard that. But 4 years later, we remain ranked around the bottom 10 on states on key education and healthcare issues. As you make your case for re-election, tell us specifically, where have you moved the needle the most on making Oklahoma top 10, and where have you been unable to move that needle?
Well, thank you. You know, as a leader and governor, and whether you're CEO, you have to set a vision for all of your employees and for all the states. So being top 10 is an aspirational goal. It's something that we're never going to hit, but it directs us in that we live in the greatest state in the country. The American dream is alive and well in Oklahoma. But we're number one in most affordable electricity. We're number 5 in bridge conditions. We were number 50th, the last place when I took over, in incarceration rates. That's something I'm very proud of. I've moved the needle, closed 2 private prisons, saving the taxpayer dollars, but also giving people second chances.
All right, so there's a long list from Governor Stitt on really some of his accomplishments in the state. It's true that our bridge condition statewide has been improved. That was actually a big push at the state level between former state senator Stephanie Bice, now U.S. senator, and Nicole Miller in the House. They together worked on some infrastructure bills in Oklahoma, actual infrastructure. I would argue we still have some problems with our roads, but we had bridges that were seriously depleted to the point that they weren't even safe. And that is something that was done during the Stitt administration. You could argue if he's taking credit for things that other people did, but he is the governor and he does get the right to set an agenda. And as he said, he has what he called a visionary goal or an aspirational goal, which at the beginning didn't sound like it was such a great answer, but I think he recovered pretty well. Saying, well, we're never actually going to be top 10 in anything, which is not the case. We are. But the question was, and I set this up about the moderator, the question was, Governor Stitt, you say you're going to make us a top 10 state. Look at these places where we're not top 10. In fact, we're in the bottom. And he pointed out education and healthcare, which is kind of a broad topic, which I don't really know how you just say where we rank X in healthcare. Well, what aspect of healthcare? And there's actually a lot of aspects that we need help with, but I just think it's funny how they point out those little things right there. So he gave a pretty good answer. Towards the end of his answer, however, he pitches it in the direction of Hofmeister when it goes like this.
But you bring up a really good question. Education is something that everybody, that's what we want for our kids. Everybody out there wants that. What my opponent needs to answer is, why are we 49th in education right now?
Well, I've got that question right here. You've got that woe sign. Take a look at that. Superintendent Hofmeister, he led into it. I mentioned education rankings not being where anyone wants them to be. You've been state superintendent for 8 years. Where specifically have you moved the needle most, and where have you been unable to move that needle?
Oh, I appreciate this question, and you're right. Oklahoma is woefully prepared for the future in education because we do not have the people on the team to meet the needs of students.
So she goes on and lays out some of her framework and plan and her visionary direction, which is funny how, when you attack on one side, it's, these are lofty goals, but then the other candidate does the exact same thing in their own words, right? So some of this is just the political back and forth nature of a debate, and that's fine. It was pretty much a civil debate as far as I could tell. But isn't that funny? If you listen closely, you might have to go back if you're on the recording here, but listen to the moderator pitching the question to Hofmeister, where he said, and I quote, "I mentioned education rankings not being where anyone wants them to be," or that may not be a verbatim quote, but that's the best I could get. He talked pretty fast there. So, education's not where anybody wants it to be. We'd all like it to be a little bit better. But when he talks to Stitt, it's, you campaigned on making Oklahoma a top 10 state, but 4 years later, we're still at the bottom on these particular issues. Classic debate moderator. Am I right? Just as good as what's his name in the debates with Trump, where Trump would lash back at him. Chris Wallace, right? That's who I was thinking of there. Classic Chris Wallace. Only this guy, one of them was named Storm, and I didn't catch the name of the other. I think he's on, I guess they're on News 9, I'm assuming. I don't watch the local news anymore. I've quit watching local news really years ago at this point. I just got so sick of hearing the same. It didn't matter what channel you're on, it's the same message if it's talking about the news. So Stitt did give a good rebuttal to some of this, and I'm going to play that for you here real quick, soundbite 179. And I want to be fair. He has implemented many points of his agenda. So hear this.
So really, the people out there, Superintendent, want to know, why has your record gone downhill in education outcomes since you've been superintendent?
Final 15 seconds to close us out.
Because we need a governor who gets it. We need a governor who understands the connection between people, teachers who are trained, resourced, and ready on day one to meet the needs of children who have very incredibly deep needs today.
Okay, and as I said, Hofmeister explained her positions, and I think she makes a formidable candidate, a formidable opponent to Governor Stitt. But part of the reason I feel that way is I just don't think that Stitt has been doing a very effective job of campaigning. He's definitely not putting in the kind of work that I saw that got him elected in the first place. So I hope he does have Trump's endorsement. And that's not something that's even, I don't think anybody mentioned that. Maybe he should mention that from time to time. I believe he's really been brought back in from what maybe he even thought was a more extreme version of what he's trying to do, and he's just more moderated. Some of that I'm sure comes from being in the office for coming up on 4 years, and you just kind of get more relaxed in what you do. But I think that he needs to have some more fight, and that will be well received at the ballot box. One thing also I think that has hurt Stitt is some of his early direction that he was trying to move us involved. He was fighting against the Medicaid expansion, which is a pretty brave position to be in because a lot of Republicans weren't really willing to get into that fight. They weren't going to take that one on. Ultimately, it was, I believe, a court decision that, or maybe, no, that was another state question, wasn't it? That ended that debate because he had an alternative solution to expanding Medicaid, which in the long run is actually going to end up costing more when the government stops paying their portion of the expansion. It was something that was tied into Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, and it will, as time goes on, just like Social Security has to continue to be funded in different ways before it collapses. And how are they going to handle the recent increase anyways? That's another question. Same thing with Medicaid. And sadly, that was a loss to the team Stitt. But there was also the tribal agreement that has basically resulted in a stalemate at this point. We still have things to work out. Stitt's own appointed attorney general has not been able to forge the relationships needed with the tribes in order to get to some kind of resolution and settlement on this weird legal space that we're in. And then add on top of that, the tribes have given their endorsement, or 5 of the tribes have given their endorsement to Joy Hofmeister. So it does look like I don't know whether to call it a close election. I mean, I'm assuming my gut says, okay, I think Stitt's going to win re-election. But we have seen other upsets in this state for one reason or another over the last 2 years, 4 years, and 6. That I would be prepared for anything. That's all I'm going to say. As we come up on this full hour program today, it's just after 5 o'clock local time now, and I've got a few things left to get to here on Liberty Sound. But we are going just fine because we don't have to worry about commercial breaks, at least not now. Maybe one day. I'd love to worry about commercial breaks, but, or maybe a sponsorship break, something like that. So let's look at one other Senate candidate, and we've got a few stories left here and then finish things up for today's stream. The Dr. Oz and versus Fetterman debate over in Pennsylvania. Well, the Fetterman campaign or team was tamping expectations ahead of this debate, at least according to a report on PJ Media, and they're quoting from a memo sent out. So they say here that according to a memo sent to the media, the Fetterman campaign wants to be clear about this matchup, which was the debate last night. It repeatedly stresses that Dr. Oz has been a professional TV personality for the last 2 decades and cites a report that Fetterman wasn't great at debates. So here's the full quote. As reporters tune in for the Pennsylvania Senate debate on October 25th, let's be clear about this matchup. Dr. Oz has been a professional TV personality for the last 2 decades, meaning that his opponent has not, Fetterman. As the Philadelphia Inquirer's top political reporters wrote, even before his stroke, Fetterman wasn't great at debates. We'll admit this isn't John's format. Look no further than the debates from the primary earlier this year. On the other hand, Oz is a polished daytime TV host who knows his camera angles and how to craft TV moments. And they go on farther, but I can't bear to read any more of this putrid press report. It's hilarious, though, that they're saying even before his stroke, which people might be saying who weren't paying attention might say, when did he have a stroke? before his stroke. And even then, he wasn't great at debates. Like, who is this guy? What qualified him for getting into office anyways? And I hope people think about that. But as I said last week, I don't want this race to be about his having a speech processing condition right now, because it may not be permanent. And as I've pointed out, I've known people, I've worked for somebody with a type of brain damage that affected their speech centers and occasionally would, be evident in some way, but that didn't make them a bad boss. It didn't make them ineffective at doing their job. We need to stick to things that actually will impact that, because we have the tech. It's really weird that we have tech that can in real time help somebody read the words that they're hearing. And then maybe in a few months' time, won't even be an issue. I mean, I don't know. Apparently, he's not that great at debates. So we'll see what happens there. You would think that Pennsylvania race would be 10 points ahead with Dr. Oz, but he was behind. And now I think they're dead even, and Oz may even be a little bit ahead. But again, with the early voting and how all that stuff works in Pennsylvania, I mean, we'll just have to wait and see on election night. So it's going to be another one of those nights where, you might be glued to your TV. I will hopefully not be glued to any TVs. I will just be glued to a computer screen and processing the results as they come in. So that's coming up in 2 weeks all across the nation. So before we get to the last story, I did promise this early on. What happens when your leftist panel backfires? And oh my goodness, hang on 1 second, because maybe I didn't even upload this video or this soundbite. Let me grab that real quick. I'm hoping that I can still do that while I'm broadcasting. If it cuts out for a second, we'll be right back. Okay, doing this in real time here. Loading on, got that on here, and let's play it. So this is the MSNBC panel where they just got these random Trump supporters, and I'm sure you've heard it by now elsewhere. I won't play the whole thing. Somebody put this to music because I was already looking for the clip on this one I'd already downloaded the clip to edit, but somebody's already put it together. So we're just going to play theirs. And this is what happens when your Trump supporters are better informed than your whole news network.
And he was photographed breaching one of the restricted areas. Is that okay?
Which area? Because I saw a video where Capitol officers were taking away barriers and unlocking doors. So, I mean,
they opened the gates.
So it shouldn't be disqualifying for an elected official if they participated in January 6th?
He didn't strike anybody. He didn't hurt anybody.
And the only one that died was a protester there, not a Capitol police
unarmed
officer.
Female veteran.
That's the only one that died.
That's the only one who died.
A police officer did die.
No, it was a stroke.
That's
not on site.
Caused by that. That's because
Right.
he shouldn't have been a police officer. It was one woman.
So what do you make, though, overall of January 6th? I mean, watching that footage, it was pretty disturbing. I mean, there were people throwing excrement at the walls, and it was it's the Capitol.
It looked a lot like Antifa's actions
Yeah, it looked
to
a
me.
lot, except on a much smaller scale. It looked the same as the Black Lives Matter riots.
That's what I saw the similarities to
around the
be.
country, not
Indianapolis
just one.
burns. Kenosha burns.
But so it's okay
Waukesha
just because
burns.
one side that you
No,
disagree with?
I'm
it's
saying
okay
Antifa
for-
It's
infiltrated.
good for one, it's good for the other.
All right. And it just goes on for like 2 full minutes. I think we got at least a minute into it there. But I mean, they're like, oh, nope, nobody died. Nope, that was a heart attack. Like they knew every little detail about this and all these things that I've been following since that fateful day. Of course, I say the real fateful day was November 3rd, 2020, not January 6th. That's not when the insurrection occurred. It was before that. And we've also covered how, how was that even what are they going to do? Just occupy the House floor until, what? Like what? I don't understand what the goal. But again, this is just like at the end of that clip that before I paused it, what the people were saying, these Trump supporters were like, it looks to me like Antifa infiltrated Black Lives Matter. I don't know if you caught that, but that's what I was saying. And that's what a lot of people, us out there ones, right? And I'm not that much out there, but sometimes I'm a little bit ahead of the curve on these things. And it looked like the same people, potentially Antifa, that had infiltrated people who were legit pissed off about things that were happening or things they perceived to be happening. I've talked about Black Lives Matter, and I've interacted with that organization since 2016, and I don't support their Marxism. I don't support the way that they do things, but that doesn't mean that everybody involved in those organizations is a terrible person. Just like Trump said, fine people, right? Remember that. But those rogue elements, or those controlling elements, or those disruptive elements, whatever you want to call them, appear to have infiltrated both sides, and they interrupt legitimate movements of the people from time to time. I think that's something we should all be aware of and be watching out for. Now we're, I think, a little bit more wise to it. People are looking out. I think we played that the audio a couple weeks ago too, of some people that were calling out somebody they assumed to be a Fed. Was it Ray Epps? We still don't know who Ray Epps is. Yeah, that's the guy right there. Okay, so that was good for a laugh for me. And I want to give you a final story today in the weird and wild section. In fact, I'm thinking about starting a second hour or a second format that would probably still be on the same channel, at least for now, on Liberty Sound, but for a different day where we talk about some of the weird and wild things in the world, including ancient history, including religion, including mythology and all that stuff, because there's a lot of topics out there that, even though they're not political, I think they're fun to talk about, but we don't necessarily I've even found in Christian churches that there's certain parts of the Bible that you're not supposed to look in. Okay. Isn't that weird? You would think that the whole thing would be what we're supposed to look in, but whether it's directly stated or whether it's something that is just left out by omission, there are parts of the Bible that we don't get a lot of lessons on. Okay. Like, the giants and the visions of Ezekiel, and like the wheel in the sky, literally a wheel in the sky that he saw, and the chariots of fire. And I mean, these are actual recordings of things that happened, right? And then I'm not just saying exclusively in the Bible, but there are old accounts of supernatural type events that we just kind of write it off as, that's just, people thought that back then. But no, I mean, I think there really were angels. I think there are angels that appeared to people and that would have a supernatural, almost mythological kind of sense to those stories, especially over time as they're canonized and they're put into culture's collective memory. So we are going to talk here on this last story about collective memory effects, which is, interestingly enough, a recent USA Today online article is talking about the Mandela effect and its origin, or like where the term comes from. Have you heard of the Mandela effect? I think most everybody by now has heard this phrase. You probably spend a lot less time than I do thinking about things like this. And I think about this one because I'm not totally sold on the Mandela effect, but it seems like everybody else is. So here we are. According to USA Today, let's read through this story published on the 17th of October of 2022 by Mithili Devarakonda. And I probably didn't get your name right, but I tried. What is the Mandela effect? The title reads, details of its origin and some examples from popular movies. Just like dreams, she begins, there's so much to unpack when it comes to human memory. Human memory can be impressive, giving us the ability to memorize the entire periodic table, or taking us on a nostalgia train to a childhood birthday. Some memories are long-term while others are short-lived. And then she says, memories are not always precise recordings of events, Medical News Today reports. Time and context can influence what a person remembers. Different opinions and other people's memories can also have an effect on your own memories. The human memory is precarious, but it can sometimes be so fickle. So that's the setup to this whole article, is that sometimes our memories are actually influenced by, it's not like we have a microfilm in our brains that just bit for bit records everything that has occurred and can be recalled up like a film reel. We have a more flexible and elastic type brain structure that I don't know all the ins and outs of how it works, but I know that our memories can be altered in ways. You can have false memories. And so as the article goes on talking about this, according to Cleveland Health, the Mandela effect is when a group of people misremember an event or detail that never occurred or existed. It is an instance of collective false memory. Excuse me. This term, the Mandela effect, was coined by a paranormal research was coined by paranormal researcher Fiona Broome. In 2009, Broome shared her false recollection of a former South African president, Nelson Mandela, dying while in prison in the 1980s. After sharing her memory online, she discovered that she wasn't alone. Many others believed that Mandela had died long before his actual death. So you've probably heard that before. Now that I read it, it may have jogged it to your memory. I don't actually recall one way or the other. I was too young in the early 1990s to have any kind of, conscious awareness of what would have been going on. And so to hear that, well, did he die in the 90s or did he die 27 years later, in 2013? What exactly, which way was it? I don't know, but I do know this has become the coined term for when people have like, well, was it this or was it that? They give some examples in the article of some other minor changes. And this is part of why I've been kind of hesitant on the whole Mandela thing. So Looney Tunes is an example. According to the Cleveland Clinic, it's common misconception for people to believe that the animated series Looney Tunes is spelled with two O's in the latter half of the title, as opposed to the traditional spelling of a song or a show tune, Tunes. So, but it wasn't Looney Tunes, Looneytoons, like a cartoon. It was a cartoon after all. Well, I don't remember that one either, so I can't tell you if I think that's a Mandela effect. Okay, next one up. Febreze. You might have this at home and use it every day, says the article, but failed to notice the air freshener brand is spelled Febreze or Febreze, if I was going to use a French pronunciation, instead of Febreze with two E's. F-E-R-B or F-E-B-R-E-Z-E is the correct spelling. I didn't know that either. I thought it would be like breeze as in a wind breeze. Maybe I should get some Febreze and then I can have my memories. Then another one, and I think I can explain this one, is Luke, I am your father, or Luke, I'm your father. Star Wars gave its fans many iconic moments throughout the films, but some remember Darth Vader's revealing his fatherhood to Luke Skywalker differently. Contrary to popular belief, James Earl Jones doesn't say, Luke, I'm your father in the 1980s film. It's The Empire Strikes Back. Instead, he says, no, I am your father. Not Luke, I am your father. No, I am your father. Well, this one, I remember that scene. I've seen it. I liked that movie when I was a kid. It was like my favorite of the three Star Wars movies that existed at that time. And I like the scene where Han Solo gets put in the cryo block. You could tell I'm a big Star Wars nerd. I don't even know what it's called, but he gets, cryo frozen or whatever. And he's got that look on his face, like, I know you can't get me. I'm Han Solo. He's great. All right. So the scene where Luke and Darth Vader are heading it off in the lightsaber battle. And I don't remember the exact words that lead up to it, but Vader says something about his father. And then Luke says, no, he told me enough that you killed him. I'm also misremembering some other song that's hilarious now that I'm throwing in extra memories to this. But Luke says, you killed my father, basically. And then Vader replies to him, no, I am your father. That's how it was said. What people are misremembering here is from Tommy Boy when Chris Farley put his mouth behind a fan and said, Luke, I'm your father. That's what people are misremembering. At least that's what I think in this case. So none of those really do it for me, right? I mean, are you with me? Is anybody, if you are still listening here, boy, you're dedicated. But is anybody, that just doesn't do it for me. Okay, there's a few others. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's dwarf with an F, not with dwarves. Actually, that's just how you spell it. Okay, that's not even the effect. No, the effect is it's not mirror, mirror on the wall. It's magic mirror on the wall. Well, that one, I remember mirror, mirror. So as far as I'm concerned, the correct history is mirror, mirror on the wall. There's another example from Casablanca. There's the Silence of the Lambs. But really, none of these, even if they are true changes somehow to collective history, or we are collectively misremembering history, is another perspective. Maybe have we jumped universes? Have just some of us jumped universes? What does it all mean? Well, I would think there'd be something a little bit more significant than some changed words to a cartoon or a line in a movie. I mean, what's the real impact of that, anyways? But I recently came across this, which kind of threw me back a little bit. This is, I suppose, by some considered to be a Mandela effect that would alter history. So, when is the only time, or when are the only times that our country's mainland has been attacked? You might say Pearl Harbor, which technically wasn't on land, right? But that was an attack on the U.S. And that's what sprung us into World War II when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. And basically, since that time, what's the worst attack that's ever occurred, a foreign attack that's occurred on U.S. soil? Well, it'd be the World Trade Centers, right? 9/11. But it turns out that that is not the only time the U.S. mainland has been attacked by foreign forces. The bombing of the Elwood oil field occurred in 1942, and it was done by a Japanese submarine that shelled the field before submerging again and returning back to open waters. The very next day is when the famed Battle of Los Angeles took place, where I think some tanks went out in Los Angeles based on some incorrect reporting that there was an attack going on there. But the day before, there actually was an attack. A Japanese submarine attacked a U.S. oil field. Did you know that? I didn't know that. I didn't know that there had ever been like a successful attack of that nature in the U.S. It also happened again in Oregon. An Oregon attack involving a dropping of incendiary bombs that were meant to start forest fires I think it came from a submarine also, or there's a Japanese pilot involved, so probably not a submarine. But the pilot that did this later returned to Brookings, Oregon, where he was made an honorary citizen upon his death. What I didn't know about this, there was fires started in Oregon by a Japanese militant in World War II. That's exactly right. That's what happened. There was even Japanese balloon bombs that made it as far as Michigan and Iowa that traveled at 30,000 feet and floated on the jet streams. One of them dropped in Oregon and didn't go off until a pregnant woman and 5 children discovered it and were killed. We had American casualties due to a foreign attack on the U.S., on U.S. soil in World War II. Then there's also, you can look up, some different examples of this. There are articles like on History or Time or something that will detail these events in more detail than I just gave you. And yet I don't remember being taught any of this growing up. It's news to me. American soil attacked by foreign powers during World War II. And then there was like spy rings and things like that too. I can understand the spies. We thought that there were enemy spies in a lot of capacities, that there were internment camps. There's a lot of parts of U.S. history, just like the Bible stuff and all these other topics that I want to go off on, that we're just kind of like scrubbed under the rug, right? We don't hear about these things. We don't hear the full context of what happened. And that's part of the problem, I think, that we're in as a country and really as a world. I'm sure it's happening elsewhere too, that we don't know our own history. And as I don't even like to use the saying, but it's fairly true, I would say, that if you don't learn your history, you're going to be doomed to repeat it. Some of the lessons that we've learned through ending slavery, some of the lessons that we've learned through a divided country that was so divided that we were willing to fire bullets at each other on the homeland. I wish to God that will never happen again, right? But we've learned from that. But if we don't learn about it, if we destroy all of our memory, all of our collective memory, we'll be subject to a lot worse than a Mandela effect. It's the riot effect. It's the degeneration effect, and it's got to be taught. We've got to remember all the aspects of what happened. So, that's part of the purpose of this show. And I hope you enjoyed this review of this week's stories. We'll be back again next week. Again, I appreciate any likes, any subscribes, all these interactions are good stuff. Hopefully be reaching some milestones real soon here. And I'll talk about some exciting stories and projects coming up in the future. Until next time, just be sure to listen on Podbean, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Rumble, and YouTube. And I'll see you next week. Outro music, Chase by Alexander Nakarada. Royalty-free music used under Creative Commons License 3.0 and 4.0 International, creativecommons.org. The Liberty Sound podcast is produced in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Copyright 2022, Ryan Hill and Liberty Sound. All rights reserved.